you, Anne. That's a fantastic introduction, slightly daunting. What I'm going to do is talk at three levels in this next 20 minutes or so. I'm going to give you a little bit on national context, and I need to start off by apologising for all of those of you who've been to our consultation events, because you will see some of the same pictures and hear some of the same stories. But I think it's important we just remind ourselves of the national context, because it is changing so fast at the moment. I'm then going to draw out three areas where I think there are particularly strong local implications for how you think and work and create your relationships. And then I'm going to go on to what I think is the direct impact on CSPs, and a tiny bit about the review that we mustn't call a review, that we must call an appraisal, but only a tiny bit about that. And then just say what I think I would be thinking if I was sitting out there at the moment. So let's start off with the national context. And in a way, I'd just like to leave those few words up there to start with, because I find myself talking about the DCMS strategy, and of course it's not a DCMS strategy, it is a government strategy for sport. And one of the great achievements really in the writing of this document is that it is genuinely cross-government. They did persuade a whole bunch of ministers to write chapters in the consultation document. They have got a tremendous amount of cross-party and cross-departmental buy-in. So we do genuinely have a government strategy for sport. And consistent with that principle is that they're starting with high-level outcomes, that if you asked almost anybody in the street, in a local shop, what they cared about, here are some of the key things they would say: physical health, mental well-being, individual development, community and social development, and economic development. Really inspiring high-level concepts. But it's important that we don't get too carried away at this point. And I know there are lots of people in sport who are already jumping on this and saying, yeah, of course, we can do all of that. Well, possibly. But what they have done in the government strategy is to say that those things will be measured in some very precise and particular ways. And there are some important choices in here. So the choice they've made about physical health is that they will align its measurement to the Chief Medical Officer's guidelines of 150 minutes of activity. And they'll also seek to decrease the percentage of the population that's inactive. So there's a really strong thread there about measuring activity and inactivity rather than going for a decrease in the age at which people get sick, for example, an increase in the age at which people get sick, or incidence of heart disease or stroke or something like that. They've chosen specifically a physical activity measure. When it comes to mental well-being, they've chosen improved subjective well-being. So not how likely am I to become clinically depressed, but how do I really feel in myself, as government measures through its so-called happiness survey. Individual development is a really tough one, but they've chosen very specifically perceived levels of self-efficacy. So what do I think I can do? What do I feel capable of? And then in social and community development, it's levels of social trust. Do I trust the people who live next door to me? Do I trust my street? Do I trust the intimate community that I exist in? And then economic development was easier, gross value added. But the key point really is that these are not abstract concepts. There are ways of measuring them that have been selected. And for sport, they have resolved them really into two areas of work. One is about engagement, one's about the sector itself. And I will just unpack for you that blue box on the left as you look at it, because every word here was laboured over with care by the people who wrote the strategy. So what we're going for is more people. So we're going for growth, not just staying where we are, from every background. So at the moment we have vast underrepresented groups. That's where we need the growth to come from. And we want them to regularly and meaningfully take part in sport, but not just in sport and physical activity. So immediately our scope is significantly broadened. And then we want to do that by having a more productive, sustainable and responsible sports sector. So there's a real message there about high standards, efficiency, no more government funding, being really efficient with what you've got. And then for those of you who've got as far as Chapter 9 in the sports strategy, There are about 30 detailed KPIs in there about how they will measure and track progress. And this is actually a very high accountability strategy, because every single year the sports minister, and I have a nasty feeling I, will be sitting in front of Parliament talking about progress against these detailed KPIs. So this isn't the end of measurement. There will still be measurement. There will still be measures that look at the percentage of the population regularly taking part, and interestingly, a decrease in the percentage of people who are physically inactive. And it's great to see that volunteering has been elevated to that higher level of a KPI, and we now have a real job to do to increase the numbers of volunteers. And when I think about how we might tackle that, the thing that is helping me most is the theory of behaviour change. And I know lots of you have heard me talk about this before, but I do think we all need to get very, very good at understanding how people are making the detailed decisions. And as you decide what your priorities are and the relationships you have, a really good understanding of the process people go through when they make their behavioural choices, I think is going to be really important. So just very briefly to remind ourselves of what's in this model, it goes from pre-contemplation down to maintenance. And pre-contemplation is essentially where I am with computer games. It would never occur to me when I open my iPad to play a computer game. There are lots of people who are there with sport where it just simply is not on their radar, and physical activity just happens when they walk from A to B, but that really is it. There's then the group of people in contemplation, so they kind of know it's there. They probably know perfectly well they should be a bit fitter, they should be a bit more active, but they're not really doing anything about it. When you start to really think about it, when you start to notice those great big adverts outside the gym and you walk past the trainer shop and think, I really need to go in, then you're in preparation. So that's when you go and buy the trainers, but you put them in the wardrobe. You don't put them on yet. You only put them on when you get into action. But the people who are in action are the people who don't have that really resilient habit. So yes, they do something, and yes, they might even do it regularly. But if they woke up this morning and thought, oh, it's a bit misty and it's a bit cold, and I know I'm meant to go for a run on Monday, but not this Monday, those are the ones in action. The people who are in maintenance are the ones who wake up and don't even think about it. They get out of bed, they put on their kit, and they go out, because that's what they do on this particular day of the week. They're in maintenance. And a lot of you in this room are in maintenance, and it's really important to think about the habits you might have where actually you're at a different point of this behavioural change. And what we've done is just to group them into 3 areas and particular levels of challenge. So for people who are in pre-contemplation or contemplation, they're the people who at any one point in time are inactive. And they might have been active previously, but at the moment they're inactive. There's a lot of people in this position in this country, and for them, they need quite a lot of help. And this is a high priority in the new strategy. The biggest number, maybe 60% of the adult population, is in that central section. So they're engaged at some level, and periodically they are absolutely doing things, but this is where you get an awful lot of churn. This is where people drop in, drop out. There isn't lots and lots of resilience. That comes at the bottom, where people are either preparing, doing it, or in maintenance. So they might be injured, or they might have moved house, so they go back up to preparation, but they're always engaged. They're always looking for the next opportunity. And if you think about how we talk about sport and physical activity, so often we talk to that bottom box. We say, we just need to find the next thing you're interested in. Yes, you've just done a charity challenge. Let me take you to the next one. But if they flipped right back to the top, they've done that now. I've done my bit of sport for this year, and I'm now doing something else. They need a very different level of engagement and challenge. So understanding the behavioural change model, although it isn't going to be the only thing we think about, is going to be really, really important as we go forward into this new world of the new strategy. So what I'd like to do now is just to try and translate that a little bit to 3 areas of work that I think are going to be very, very important locally. So thinking about addressing inactivity, there's a very strong steer that money, effort, emphasis has got to go into people who now are inactive. So we have to start measuring where people are today. If you are working with partners, if you're helping design projects, it's no good to say, I'm going to make this really appropriate for inactive people, if you don't know where the people who come through the door are starting from. So we have to get better at understanding that. We also know that if you're starting in those top pink boxes, then you are probably going to need multiple interventions. And I don't mean the hoist to get you off the sofa. Let's get rid of the idea that everybody who's inactive is completely immobile and a really long way away physically. They might not be, but mentally they are. So when we did the work with This Girl Can, one of the things we did was a qualitative intervention where we followed 50 women online, all levels of activity, didn't tell them we were This Girl Can or Sport England or anything like that, but we asked them about their views on sport and physical activity. And for the ones who were starting from an inactive perspective, you would be amazed how many times they thought about it and then it went away. And then they thought about it, and then it went away. And some of them would, for 3 or 4 months of this period, say, I really mean to do this, and I saw this today, and I think I'll do it next week, but they didn't do it. So those multiple interventions are the number of times they have to think about it, be presented with it, offered something, before they get out of that contemplation into the preparation. And I've put working with health here because we know that they're one of the most important triggers. So the moment that your doctor says, oh, your cholesterol's a bit high, or have you thought about your heart disease risks and your family history, or you realise you're pre-diabetic, don't you? We have what's called a teachable moment. And we know very well that then, if you offer really good sport and physical activity options, it's a really good moment. But we also know that the delivery is absolutely crucial. So let's just say that you've had a moment with a doctor and you've come out and thought, God, I really need to do something. So you gear yourself up and you decide you'll go swimming. And that is not chosen lightly because that is what millions of people say they would like to do. And you go to the swimming pool and you've worked out that, yes, it is a time when anybody can walk in. You've worked out it's not when they're going to send you away for being over 15. That's happened to me lots of times in my local pool. And you get to the desk, and the woman says, what are you here for? And you say, I've come to swim. And you're already thinking, God, I've got to take all my clothes off in the changing room. So you're already quite nervous. And she says, can you swim a length? And you think, oh my God, I think so. And you say, I think so. Because you can't come in if you can't swim a length. What do? Do you walk away? And even if you don't walk away, next time you're thinking about going, do you think, God, is she going to ask me if I can swim a length again? So every single piece of the customer journey for somebody who is in those pre-contemplation and contemplation steps is critical. And when we think about what we design, we have to design it really, really carefully. Children and young people. There's a lot about children and young people in the DCMS strategy. And we all know that that is delivered locally in some extremely varied educational structures. And there are some big things that are going to be there locally. So school games will carry on, but there is going to be a review. The primary premium is going to carry on, and that's good, and you play a really important role in that. And there's a real emphasis about transition between primary and secondary education, and you need to be ready to add your expertise and thoughts to that, because there's going to be, I think, a lot of debate and a lot of work around those areas. But I would just like to talk briefly about how we might think about the work that we do as a group with children and young people. Because there is a real issue here structurally in that we, and to an extent you, can't go right into the school system because we don't have responsibility for school sport. We don't have the funding, we don't have the policy responsibility, and that is not going to change. And in our recent consultation process, I think this is probably the thing that people got most angry about. And although I said with increasing fervour as the consultation process went on, we really can't do this, every table discussion was then dominated by, well, why can't you? And this is ridiculous. And to an extent, I completely get the frustration that underlay those remarks, because young people don't distinguish between what happens to them when they're in a PE lesson compared to in a sports club down the road. That is all going to shape how they think and feel about sport and physical activity as they get older. But we do have to find some pragmatic solutions to how we influence them. So the way that we're starting to think about this within Sport England is really to think about what is it that happens to a child and young person between the ages of 5 to 14, the areas where we don't work now, that is going to make most difference to them for the rest of their lives. And what we have concluded, based on the insight, because as you know, we're still obsessed with the insight, is two things. One is a basic level of capability and competence. And I don't mean the ability to hold your hockey stick perfectly or serve in tennis brilliantly. I mean literally the ability to run, throw, skip, jump, balance, all the basic things that are parts of physical literacy. And the second is a sense of enjoyment that is not coloured by some really bad experiences. So if those are the two things we are seeking to generate in young people, a sense that I can, and actually this is something I enjoy doing, then what we need to do is to try and affect their experiences wherever they are, whether they're in school or whether they are out of school in a community environment or just doing something entirely social with their parents. And I think the key challenge for everybody in the sporting system with that in mind is not to become obsessed by trying to find the talented and by trying to convert the people who aren't talented into the talented. Because if you think about the standard distribution on ability, there will be about 15% at the bottom who are poor and who are really going to struggle. There will be about 15% at the top, maybe less as they get older, who have talent. And then there will be a massive 70% of people in the middle who are varying degrees of average. And in sport, particularly for children, we, the system, spends a huge amount of time trying to move people along that dial and to get them, even if they're average, to just being a bit better and being a bit better. And we really need to think that if the two things we want are basic ability and enjoyment, how does that play if you're simply telling me I've got to get better and you're not quite good enough and you're always going to get picked fifth in this particular team? We need a whole band underneath of that, which is about enjoyment and pleasure and doing things I can do at my level of ability that make me going to want to do this going forward. And in particular, we have to avoid the negative experiences. Because when we work with inactive people, the insight we collect says that the most powerful experience you can have in sport as a child is a negative one. The day you were scared, the day you hated it, the day somebody treated you badly, that's the thing that will turn you off for life. And so we really have to find, when we're working with children and young people, ways to avoid those negative experiences. And that flows right through into coaching, volunteering, the structures of sport, how we train our PE teachers, how we talk about ability in young people. And it's a long, long way from where most of the sports system is today. Place-based pilots. This as well is a very different way of working and thinking. And this is where I think CSPs have got a very, very powerful role to play. So we've been challenged within the strategy to find some places where we work in great detail, particularly where there's a strong health and wellbeing board that is trying to tackle inactivity. And the challenge we have there is to drive growth in participation through underrepresented groups being better represented and by tackling inactivity. Now, I think here we have to be a little bit innovative in our thinking. And we need to stop thinking that what we do in our project is going to be in the centre of that place. So if you imagine a diagram with us in the middle and everything else around there, that's how we tend to think. And I think what we have to do is to move to a position where we recognise that in a local ecosystem, as you know very well, there are lots of different balls, lots of different players, different relationships, different sequences. And our job when we work in a place is to go in and to work out what those relationships and power structure is, where the resources sit in that particular place, and therefore how we might intervene most effectively. And who do you think is going to be best placed to help us work that out and to navigate then that climate, build good relationships and decide where the investment goes? It should absolutely be the CSP. In some of the places where we work at depth now, that isn't the case. Some it is, but not everywhere. So I think your ability to help us work in that way is going to be crucial going forward, which takes me on to what I think are the key impacts of the strategy on CSPs. I think there is a real inversion going on in this new strategy. So although it is the government's national sports strategy, it is actually about making things work on the ground. And so that isn't a sense of let's design 10 national programmes and work out in a line how we make them work everywhere, That really is understanding the varied local dynamics and building up. So I think your role in understanding those local dynamics and building up is going to be very, very important. If you think about what matters to people most in their normal lives, at the moment, the money and the decision making is all devolved. Health, education, local authority spending on sport, it is all done at local level. The job of organisations like us, and you have to help us with this, is to bisect that with some vertical lines of policy, help and funding, and you need to navigate those intersections. And they will be varied in different places, which is where your local knowledge is so important. So there is a set of new priorities coming for you here, which is much more about bottom-up, much more about local delivery, much more focused on inactivity and underrepresented groups. But this being government, I'm afraid from the other direction, is also coming a load of instructions about greater efficiency, less public subsidy, more joint working, and a real emphasis on standards and governance. And I think our challenge here is to turn those things to our advantage. So for more efficiency, read better communication, read less just putting money in and more working out tactically where it might be perfectly deployed, and who I can work with locally, either in the CSP network or in the local system, to make my costs lower. For more emphasis on governance, read better governance, better boards, better resource, more independent input, more people from business and just from a broader background than sport. If we can create better led organisations, and I include mine and all the others we work with in this as a result of better emphasis on governance, that puts us in a stronger place. And the fact that we have the appraisal of CSPs going on now, I also think is a great advantage. Because at the moment, there is a lot of change, a lot of creativity. The very worst thing that could happen to the CSP network was for it to be left behind at that moment, for it to stay the same, exactly the same, and not to think about what its role, its priorities, strengths and development needs are in this new environment. So I genuinely see that as a big opportunity. So if I was sitting out there, other than saying, isn't she going to sit down in a minute, what would I be thinking? I think I would be really clear on what I am good at. I see some CSPs who drive very effectively from behind, who actually have quite a low-key relationship in their area, but are very good tacticians and know exactly what their roles are. I see others who really are the place, and where everybody else in the place accepts that they are the natural leader. I see some that are brilliant at particular things. Anne was very kind about me. I shall now be kind about her in return. And they've done some wonderful work on This Girl Can, some really innovative thinking, getting completely different advocates, in this case a hairdresser, to get women active. So I'd be clear about what I am good at in this new environment. I'd also want Andy Reid, who's with us today, to hear my voice in the appraisal process. So what is it I think? What can I add? Where do I think the structures and the systems could be better? But I would say in Sport England over the last year, we have had probably more challenge and are being given more change to implement than in that previous 9 years that I've been there, including right at the beginning. I'm probably working harder, thinking more differently, being more creative now than at any point in those 9 years. And that feels really positive. But to make it feel positive, you've got to be open to the learning and you've got to be open to change. What I would say to you is I genuinely believe this is really useful learning and this will be good change. You just need to make sure you are front and centre of that process. Thank you very much.